Stephanie Young is up next. Let me tell you a little bit about her and the reason why she ran in, and a reason why she's going to end up running out is because she is President Obama's primary liaison to the African American community. And as you know, things are pretty busy over at the White House these days. She is also the former communications director for the Congressional Black Caucus during the 112th Congress. Stephanie, we're so honored to have you here, and we appreciate your time. And please, we'd love for you to share your thoughts with us this morning. Thank you.
Much. And thank you for forgiving me for having to run in and run out to the panelists. I know that you all are going to have an excellent conversation. So the first thing I will say about the legacy of slavery that I think has been challenging for us as a nation is just simply talking about it. I've been in so many different offices throughout my political career, and talking about slavery makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Doesn't necessarily make me uncomfortable, but it makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and it's incredibly important that we don't gloss over it, and we don't act like it never happened, but we all talk about it, and we all talk about our personal experiences with it, especially if we know any personal history about our family. My grandmother was born in 1913 to sharecroppers in Georgia, and I know that they worked that land for a long time, so I can only imagine that her grandparents were slaves just because of her age, and her parents potentially were slaves as children. So at the end of the day, we're just not that far removed. And I think sometimes as African Americans, we act as though we are, and that it was so long ago, but we carry all of these traditions and things with us every day, and I know that I do. I'm also a product of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and that church was founded through a runaway slave, someone who actually, I'm sorry, it's not a runaway, but he paid for his freedom and started a denomination when he felt as though we were being discriminated against in the Methodist Church. So I come from a deep tradition, and I think that when you do have that foundation, it's easier to acknowledge and also be proud. And as far as I think what this president has meant, even though he's not necessarily the descendant of a slave, or slaves rather, his wife is, and he acknowledged that way back when, in 2008. I still remember the day that he gave that speech on March 18th. Actually, it was 2007, I believe. It was in Chicago, and he talked about race. And I remember I was working at the NewsHour, Jim Lehrer on PBS at the time, and I remember hearing him speak and looking at some of the other black folks in the room, in the newsroom, and just feeling like, oh my gosh, I've never heard a black person speak about race like this before publicly. It was almost like he brought that conversation out of the closet and spoke about it in a way as though to make you feel like my voice is being heard. He's speaking for me, he's speaking for us. And so much pride, but also so much relief in that moment, because he really, I think, opened the eyes of so many people who might not have been tolerant, didn't want to really hear about it, and really maybe just didn't even think about it from their own experiences. And I think that's what's been so powerful about this presidency and this administration, simply the imagery, simply, the history of where they come from, and knowing, that slaves built the White House. And the First Lady just said that a couple of days ago during a speech when she was giving a commencement speech in New York, but just simply making that acknowledgement because we want to sweep it under the rug. Henry Louis Gates, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with some of his work on PBS, he mentioned, he didn't mention, but he did a series about blacks in Latin America, and he called it the Black Grandmother in the Closet. I almost feel like it's slavery in the closet here in the United States. So from the Chicago race speech all the way to Charleston, South Carolina, on Friday will be the 1-year anniversary of the Emanuel 9 shooting, and the president went down and did a speech where he talked about bringing down the Confederate flag. And I just rewatched it the other day, and I was in the room at that moment, and the energy in the room, and just the fact that we had an African-American president talking about how painful the Confederate flag is to see, how scary it still feels for us to see, again, felt like someone was speaking for us in a way that's never been done before. But he stood up and said, the cause for which that flag is erected is wrong. Slavery was wrong. And I know other presidents have said that before, but in that moment, it meant so much to me personally, but I know it meant a lot for the folks in the room. And then also, again, when we talking about it, the Washington Post did an expose about the First Lady's family and traced her all the way back to, ironically, to South Carolina, to Georgetown, South Carolina, and talked about some of her earlier ancestors. And then my boss, Valerie Jarrett, who's senior advisor to the president, participated in Henry Louis Gates' Our African American Lives, where they traced her family, which has so many huge African American figures and firsts, but also her great-grandfather, who went to MIT, was the son of a slave who saved money that he got, that he received from his master, who was actually his father, and through his carpentry work. And then once he was freed, because this is right around the time of Civil War, he saved up even more money and was able to send his son to MIT, which is extraordinary to think about. So at the end of the day, we all have these stories. We're not all fortunate to know about them, but it's so important for it to be a part of the conversation and it to be a part of the conversation here today, but also figuring out creative ways in which we can bring our children into the conversation. And I do think that there is quite a bit of content now that's emerging through programs like Underground on WGN, which we screened at the White House, and even Roots, reimagined by A&E, and really giving the next generation an opportunity to understand it, but to own it, and not to own it with a sense of shame, because I do think it's been associated with that, but a sense of pride. I'm proud to walk into the White House every day and know that I come from a strong people, and knowing that that parts of my family were enslaved here in the United States and never could have imagined a moment like this. And I think that as we continue to move forward and as more people embrace that history in pride and instead of shame, I think that will do wonders. But back to my original point, talking about it is what's so important, and not sweeping it under the rug. So I'd be remiss if I did not thank the Josiah Henson Leadership Conference and Foundation and everyone here today for having me. And I would also be remiss if I didn't speak a little bit too, really quickly, at the criminal justice piece, which is such a huge issue for this presidency and for this administration, and the president has directed us to run through the tape on this issue, so it's no slowing down. I'm actually going to a meeting on criminal justice at 11:15 if I can make it there, and I'm saying all this to say that it's all interconnected, and we do understand that the issues that a lot of African Americans are facing now, and even the way that we work together as a people, has been influenced and has been touched by our history and our past. And I think that because of the president's personal history, he's been able to strike that balance and even open, I think, African Americans' eyes to looking at how and understanding how our white brothers and sisters and others could think of things differently, and it not come from a place of malice or hate, but it just comes from a place of just not being informed and not necessarily having to think about it. So I think that we needed someone like this, and we needed a moment like this to really have that middle ground. But we're working hard to figure out what we can do on the federal side of things when it comes to our criminal justice system. So again, I thank you all so much, and I do apologize for having to leave. So thank you.